Hey everyone, a warm welcome. I'm Lisa Sweeney, the CEO of Business and Heels. Let us know where you're joining us from today. It's an interesting day down in sunny Geelong. Let us know what the weather's like where you're coming from. Let's see who we've got online. As everyone's joining us, it's a wonderful day down here in Geelong, and I'm interested to know who you are and where you're joining us from. So feel free to pop a little comment in chat as we get everybody online. So a warm welcome to everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Sweeney. Oh, we've got Claire from sunny Sydney. Who else is joining us online? Let us know where you're from as we get everyone together. Welcome to John, who's just joined us here. So if you are online, feel free to pop your video and mic on.
Hi, Lisa. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, John. Welcome.
Perfect. It took me a little while to get on, but all good.
Excellent. Yes. Zoom works in wonderful ways, and sometimes the tech works and other times it's a challenge. We're just waiting for Paul to join us, but we might kick off and get started with everybody online. So welcome. We've got Stacey from Cornerland in Adelaide, Martin from Sydney, hi from Geelong, Moran from Sydney, lovely to see you. Oh, and we've got people from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, 32 degrees, wow, that's cruel. You really shouldn't say that to us. We've got Sid from Melbourne, Sharon from Launceston, Wendy from Collingwood, Brian from Sydney, so welcome to everybody. We might get started and hopefully we'll get Paul online in a second. A warm welcome to everyone. I'm Lisa Sweeney, the CEO of Business and Heels, the team that are proudly working to accelerate gender equity with the Gender Equity Awards Recalibrate. So let's begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we join today's meeting from. From wherever you are across our vast and diverse country and overseas, on our behalf, I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend the respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge that inclusion's not a new concept for our First Nations people. They've been demonstrating this for thousands of years in caring for our country, each other, and putting a real value on our environment. In the spirit of reconciliation, Business and Heels acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea, and the community, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. Welcome to today's discussion on gender in the workplace. It's lovely to have you here too, Paul. I'm glad you've made it through our little challenging landscape of Zoom. Let me give you a little bit of a picture of what we're going to do today. So the current gender pay gap in retail sits at 15%. And there is still only 35% of senior retail roles filled by women, despite more than 50% at the entry level. Gender equity and inclusion creates strong and productive teams that deliver great results. I don't think anyone will argue with us. However, in many places, we know that many of you want to do more. And on behalf of your wives, mothers, and daughters, we don't want to wait for another generation before things happen to improve. So today, with the emphasis on political correctness, gender fluidity, and increasing litigation, many of you are unsure how to best take action. Explaining your lack of know-how is often not well received, and it can be misconstrued as a lack of support. And so much of this remains undiscussed. Today, our two guests, John Gualtieri and Paul Zahra, are going to share their experiences and give you some approaches and a roadmap that you can choose to adopt. So let me start by introducing you to Paul Zahra, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Retailers Association. He's also a non-executive director, board and company advisor, and one of Australia's most influential corporate diversity advocates. He's a leading force in the Australian retail industry for over 40 years. I don't know whether we're counting that, Paul, but Paul represents small to large retailers throughout the Australian Retailers Association. Paul's corporate roles have included Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of David Jones Limited, as well as senior leadership roles at Target Australia and Officeworks Superstores. Paul advises board and companies in retail, both traditional and startups, on leadership, transformational change and diversity. So with all that being said, welcome, Paul.
Hi, Lisa. Good to see you. And John, also good to see you as well. So is that applause or is that just somebody working from home? I'm not too sure.
That's applause.
We'll take that as that. And to all of you out there listening in, it's really great to be here. I'm on Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, and really pleased to be on this session today. Look, I'll probably start by saying there's no doubt women are fundamental to the success of Australian retail, and it comes down to this key metric. Most people don't know this, but women actually contribute around 75% of discretionary spending is made by women, and they make up 7% of the retail workforce. So that's quite significant numbers. And we're seeing that already as discretionary spending is starting to fail, and we're seeing, or fall rather, and we know that women are having to make choices right now. And that's why it's so important that we have gender equality in our industry. Now, despite all that, of course, women only occupy 27% of board positions with Australian retailers, and that's not a number to be proud of. But what's worse is that the pipeline doesn't look that great either, with only 17% of our sector led by female CEOs. So, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. As you mentioned, Lisa, there's a 15% pay gap, which is concerning. And it's one of the contributing factors to women retiring with superannuation savings 23% lower than men. So there's certainly a lot here to be concerned about and for us to take action on. We also know that women are much more likely to encounter sexual discrimination or sexual harassment in the workplace and are 3 times more likely to be victims of domestic and family violence. So this is simply not good enough. Solving gender diversity in your business or workplace builds a vital foundation for diversity, equality and inclusion, and that you can expand and refine to include everybody.
Thanks, Paul, and it's good to get that sort of industry snapshot. So let me introduce you to John Gualtieri. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Kmart Australia and New Zealand, which has more than 325 stores and is recognised as one of the most profitable discount department stores in Australia. So John commenced with Kmart in 2008 as Divisional Merch Manager for the Home Division, and in 2010 was appointed GM of General Merchandise and Store Renewal. By 2016, he was appointed Chief Operating Officer, managing multiple teams across many functions and business units. He's led planning, buying and store renewal teams and has worked with suppliers and retailers across Asia, the UK and the US. So he brings a huge amount of experience to this discussion. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Lisa and Paul. Good to see.
Sorry about that.
Lisa. Thanks for that lovely applause, and good to see you, Paul, once again.
So, John, Kmart's known for taking the initiative and market leadership. Can you give us a snapshot of what you're doing around diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, sure. Look, we've got, so I guess the first thing is our vision is to be quite progressive and creative in equity in the workplace, providing an inclusive experience for all our team members and customers, and ensuring that our team reflects and engages the communities that we operate in. And we've had that mantra there for quite some time. We know when people from varying backgrounds and experiences come together, it enables us to innovate, make better business decisions, and also create the most value in our organisation through teams, customers, and community. So we've actually broken up into 4, our focus areas into 4 when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So gender, First Nations, disability and accessibility, and LGBTQIA+. So I thought I might just quickly, just under gender, so our goal, we call it a balanced goal. So we have a 40-40-20, 40% women, 40% men, and 20% either gender or gender diverse across our organisation to support our teams. This allows for the critical mass to be achieved in decision making across all business areas, not just the organisational level. So for our current status and progress, 75% of the functions have achieved gender balance. In Australia, we represent 40% of the leadership roles. So that, for us, so for executive leadership roles, so we're quite proud of that. And I might touch a bit later on, because I know we've only got an hour, but there's different things, that we've got. So our approach to flex where, flex when, flex well, So that flexibility. Then we've got inclusive leadership. We've got education that has cultural confidence, disability with confidence, getting skilled access, and also LGBTQIA plus inclusion and supporting pride and diversity. So there's quite a few things that we have in the different that different space.
Well, and I think what we discovered when we did the Gender Equity Awards is actually the companies that are at the forefront of this are not just solving the gender problem, they're solving all the problems. And just by the nature of thinking inclusively, you're picking up everything. And it's lovely to see that that's reflected in what you're doing. So now let's go on with the discussion. John, you've had a lot of experience working with people, and in that time you've handled numerous difficult conversations. What's been one of the key lessons you've learned, and perhaps you could share with us a specific example of how you employed it?
Yeah, sure. So you know, as I go through my story, I guess I've had to become my authentic self, and I'd say that it's taken me a while to land where I am today, and I've no doubt made some errors and maybe great learnings along the way. I guess in my early career, I would have been a bit more doubtful about making the wrong decisions. I would have been getting information from all different stakeholders, and maybe even worried about what others would think about the decisions I'd make. I'd be worried about precedents and not being able to undo decisions that I'd make. And there was a level of discomfort in actually having the discussions. And you see, trying to manage all these different variables, as well as then trying to help achieve the best outcomes for the individual that you're in the meeting or the organisation, became a process to me, to be honest with you. And I guess I felt like I lost that human element. So over time and with experience, I made changes to my style and approach. And I started with a couple of simple rules. There's actually a little bit more than a couple of simple rules. So I've got 7 kind of things. So the first thing that I always whenever I have a discussion, doesn't matter, it could be a difficult discussion, not difficult. And a mentor of mine gave me this one. He says, "What do you want to be remembered for, John, when you leave Kmart or when you leave retail altogether?" So I keep that in the back of my mind as I go through processing information and decision making. I've got to be comfortable with ambiguity. You don't always have all the answers all the time, and you need to say that you don't know, but you'll find out. That wasn't, early on in my career, I felt like I had to be the person that actually had to have all the different answers, and that's just not possible, right? Try to think about outside the box when you try to solve for unique problems. When making decisions, allow yourself in future to review those decisions. And I'll give you an example a bit later on when I hadn't done that, and it was a really bad experience for myself, the organisation, and the individual. When working through complex issues, get all the information that you need from the different stakeholders. But when working through the issue with either the issue or opportunity, because they're not always issues, with the individual or the teams, be the front person. Don't outsource don't outsource this important piece of interaction with your team or the individual. I also buy into the fact that 99% of humans that actually come to work actually want to do a really good job. So I don't think actually many people come into work to do a bad job. So when you face, into some of these uncomfortable, uncertain conversations or topics, make sure that your starting point is from a place of goodness, and you want to achieve a great outcome rather than a place of bad and something that, and come through it that someone's really trying to pull the wool over your eyes. That took me a little while to kind of come from that, but you get to better decision making if you start from a better place. And then finally, as many of you would know, and you've heard this before, how I subscribe this to 100%. If you treat people like you'd like to be treated yourself, you're generally halfway there. And they're quite simple. They're not scientific examples, but I find that those principles hold me in pretty good stead to try to get good outcomes for, I guess, organisation, team members, and myself.
I love it. So 7 truisms, I think. Easy to remember. And did you have a specific example that you wanted to share?
Yeah, look, I can talk to you one about the flexibility, I think. So this was one when I first started at Kmart, and I made the decision when I first came to Kmart that I'd be very, very different. So the work-life balance was important to me, and I wanted to create a culture which was different from the previous organisation that I'd worked in. So I set up some early, some things that, I wouldn't have meetings before 9 a.m. and I'd make sure that we finished before 5 p.m. There'd definitely be no weekend work, and there wouldn't be any late meetings. That was kind of it. My makeup of direct reports, there was 5 females and 3 males. Each of the direct reports were at different stages of their life stage, and some were about to go on paternity leave, maternity leave. Others were expected back, and others were just juggling the dramas of, associated with having young families or just life in general. My DR group was amazing. They were intelligent. They understood retail really well. They lived the values, and part of the reason why we started to see some success at Kmart. But I remember one of my DRs coming up to me and saying, "I'd love to work. I'd love to work a day from home just so that I can get ahead and manage some of the complexities that life throws my way." Now I'm going back to 2002, 2008, 2009. So this is very different to where we are today, because today's a very different. But as a leader, I also don't subscribe that everyone works 9 to 5 also, and 5 days a week. So, I feel as long as you get the work done, we're all adults. The teams are generally functioning pretty well. There's a bit of give and take on how and when you get how you get work. So for this DR, that I said to them, fine, let's see how it works. Let's make Thursdays a work from home day. And remember, like I said, that there was no MS Teams. Technology wasn't all that great. But I did this, and I opened it up just for both males and females, and whether you're paternity or maternity or not. But that was my way of trying to keep basically the work from home or a meeting-free day on a Thursday. And the take-up was pretty good. It was 80%, to be honest with you. For me, what did that mean for me? I spent my time in stores back on the Thursday, but you need to be flexible. So I had to also make sure that I didn't arrange meetings on Thursday, which with the team, which kind of worked well. And ensure my bosses, also understand what I kind of work through. So they didn't schedule meetings in, because you need to plan around that. And there's general agreement, but if there was something that would actually have, we had a bit of an agreement that said I'd give plenty of notice. And if we had to be in the office or we had to go to a meeting on a Thursday, we'd do that. Other days of the week, I try to schedule as many meetings after the kids drop off or before the pickups. Wasn't always possible, but I try to keep that in mind when I try to schedule those meetings, because they're the important times. The teams that were reported into my direct reports, they were fully aware of the agreement. So it wasn't anything, because I've seen where you've had agreements with different individuals and then you're not transparent about it, and it causes ripple effects down the organisation. So everyone was aware of what we'd actually done, and the work from day, work quite home, that kind of cascaded as well down into the organisation. But it allowed team members to come back to work earlier, to be honest with you. It was great for the business. It was great for the individuals. I tapped into a talent base that I think many organisations aren't able or weren't able to tap into by having to be more flexible in my approach. So I guess this part of here, working from home, was early on in the piece for me, and it was access to excellent talent. So long story. So sorry about being so
No, I think there's a lot of great lessons in that, John. I love the discussion around the transparency, so that people knew above, and I would have loved to work for you back then. So clearly some great initiatives. So let's flip over to Paul, because we're going to talk about a similar sort of thing. So today, as a manager and leader, it can be really easy to orchestrate situations that are not inclusive versus ones that are. So Paul, can you give me an example of one and what you as a leader can do to address the situation when it's not inclusive?
Yeah, good question, Lisa. And I'm going to build on what John said. So thank you for that, John. I think there's no doubt that given the high level of females working within retail, the interesting thing is just to expand that a little bit further. Not everybody is probably as understanding or as inclusive as John just described how he's managing his team. So often in the reality in a retail environment is that the more senior you get, the more male dominated it is. That's the numbers. And as a result, and it's highly competitive, Lisa. As you know, Lisa and I worked together at Target many years ago. And I guess what I used to see, and that's developed over the years, is just bad behavior. So, when there was one particular manager that I worked with who would purposely set a meeting up at 3 to 3:30 over that school pickup time. Now, this is before flexible working, purely because he knew that his competitor, as a female manager, would have to pop out in an invisible way to pick up the kid from school and get back to the office and unnoticed. So it was a way of actually excluding this individual, and it was really awful to see. And I think, you know, I'm a gay man without children, and I think I've been very super sensitive to, in my situation, about not my sexuality being, it's not dissimilar for women. They have to keep their, often their families invisible. For somebody that's gay, they're trying to keep their sexuality invisible, you know, back then. Now, today's a very different world with flexible working and, you know, the demand for people wanting to work from home. And what we saw through COVID was an acceleration of so many trends. But one of the biggest trends in an employee world was this idea of working from home. So John was certainly at the top of the curve, but now it's now almost, you know, if you want to keep good talent, you've got to be able to allow people. It even has gone a step further. It's not about working from home, it's about working from anywhere. So you could go to the Gold Coast for the week and work from there, and we'd be okay with that. And that's posed all sorts of challenges. But the message for me is there's in my learning, there are some sensitivities which I'm really conscious around in this role with the ARA. We have a work from anywhere policy, but there's sensitivities before 9 o'clock because of parents, and not just gender specific, but mainly impacts women around dropping kids off at school. So that sort of that 8 till 9 is quite super sensitive, between particularly 8:30 till 9. And then the other side of the fence is really that 3 to 3:30 piece. So I'm very conscious. I know who of my team have got children. I don't schedule meetings at that time. I'm making sure that they're able to go and do what they need to do and then pick up, and everybody works differently. So you've got to, my lessons from all of this was, don't make your families invisible, be, you know, out them. So you're out and obvious about having a family, that they're important to you. Don't excuse or apologize for going to pick up children or drop them off. That's part of life. That's, you know, I can tell you now, I'm not without the personal experience, but I know this from my own family, that children will always remember that relationship with their parents. They won't, and parents will not remember what they were working on at the time that couldn't excuse them from going to work. So really important message. As a child that had a very busy set of parents that were never available, that sort of stayed with me quite well. And, you know, don't make your family invisible, and make sure that you're clear on your boundaries. So that's really obvious, because there's some people, for me, simple down, that are either morning people or evening people. I'm very much a morning person, so I want to be done, you know, and dealt with meetings by 5 o'clock. There's others that prefer to work into the night, and be conscious that whole sort of inclusivity comes around that flexibility. It goes for both genders, but I'm so super sensitive towards women because they're multitasking so many things, and it's okay, you know, to make it clear around policies around, you know, if you've got to take a child in for a medical appointment, that can be done, not to excuse it, but just let me know that you're out for that hour or whatever the time is, and then we can work around it. So it's flexibility on both sides, the employee and the employer side.
Fabulous. And so if somebody today was actually in that situation where a boss had called that meeting deliberately, how would you suggest they tackle that?
Look, my style doesn't always work for everybody. My style is to take things front on always, because I think you've got to be direct, and you can do that in a really in a very friendly way, but to make sure that your boss realizes how important it is to you. So important to you that, in fact, you know, there's fear of losing you from talent perspective, and currently there's a low unemployment rate, so now's your time to take action. But you know, it's really important that you, if you haven't already done this with your employer, that you've set expectations and saying, this is important to me. You know, it may not have been the way we've worked together, but I need this assurance moving forward. So you've got that sort of psychological contract around how you're going to operate together. It may not necessarily be in writing, but it's a contract, a psychological one that you can work with. And if your boss says to you, that's unacceptable to me, well, you know you're working for the wrong company, and you need to then find a company where you're valued, but equally where your values are aligned.
And just as a general question to both of you, just popped into chat, do you think a business has a responsibility to the wider society to make sure that kids are well raised with parents? You know,
I'm happy to start, and I'm gonna just change the question a little bit. We employ 42,000 team members, and you know, a vast majority of them are 15 to 18-year-old, quite impressionable. So I think that Kmart's got a responsibility to ensure that we do everything that we can to help these kids along their life journey. It doesn't replace the role of parents, but I do think, with line managers, store managers, our policies, procedures, there's a part that we play in their upbringing. I've got 2 girls, both of them started at Kmart, believe it or not, when they were 15. They come home, they talk about their managers, they talk about work, they learn a lot. So that wasn't the question. But I just wanted to say that the business has got a responsibility. So for me, do I think business will never replace the role of parents. But I think if we could make it easier on the parents, if there's certain things that they need, or if there's meetings, or if there's special events, and we are open, and I actually encourage them to make sure you don't miss out on those younger years of life. I think we've got a role to play. Should it be legislated? I'm not sure. But I go back to what I said. If you can just treat people the way you'd like to be treated, I think you get a really good outcome. And then you start to build culture, and you've got people that actually want to come and work with your organisation. And if you've got that, you've got a really good place to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no argument that kindness builds loyalty, and loyalty builds productivity, and the outcomes are extraordinary versus people that feel like they're being dragged into work. Paul, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm going to give you a retail response, because I think, kids are future customers, and they will remember quite well on how their parents have been treated in their organisation. And, there's in both companies that I've worked for, big retailers, David Jones, Target, there's always been a lineage of people that their parents have worked there, their kids have worked there, and it goes down the path. And if you want that sort of vocation, seeing retail as a career, it's so important that you've got children who are so impressionable, speaking very positively about their parents' work experience, but equally around the brand. So that would be the way I would look at it.
Absolutely. Well, we might jump to another question about boardroom environments, because they're slowly changing, but there's still a number of practices that make people feel excluded. So Paul, can you share with us an example and your thoughts on what we can do about it?
Yep. Look, I've got plenty of examples. I've got to use one example because hopefully it'll resonate for you all. But, it's interesting because when I joined David Jones in the 1990s, this is not probably unfamiliar to many boards back then. There was one female member on the board. And interestingly, of course, as I mentioned, 75% of spending is done by women. So it's sort of a bit, when you look back now, you sort of can understand. One may say that had there been better gender equity at the board at that time, then the company wouldn't have as many problems as it had through the 2000s as the organisation tried to reimagine itself as a digital or an omnichannel retailer. So, my memory back then, I was an executive. It was probably the most exclusive conversation you could have, because the predominantly male board would start the board meeting discussing the golf and the football. And by the time they worked through every sport, of course, you could just see this one female shrivel up because she couldn't participate in any of that conversation. So they're things that you've got to put a gender filter on and say, actually, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate? Is that conversation best had one-on-one in a corridor? How do you have an inclusive conversation so you don't, and boards are very powerful meetings. They're, the best of that supposedly of the industry. So anything like that where you can reset the agenda, if you're seeing that that's occurring in your organisation, is a really, really important point. Now, it's generalisation, because there's many women that love golf, and there's many women that love football, but generally, to start off a professional environment like that, discussing those, particularly the football, which can be polarizing, is just not the way to start. So I think you've got to be conscious about those conversations. It's got to be icebreakers, but it's what did you do on the weekend? How did you spend it? And be more sort of open in your questioning rather than being so specific. It's nothing wrong with discussing the football at the board meeting, but when you've done that for the first 15 minutes, it's an exclusive. So as a management team member going in to present, I felt really excluded. And what I did do, it made me realize I was different to everybody else, and that I wasn't going to be able to communicate on the same level. So it heightened my anxiety somewhat. And it goes the same for anyone that has that's in a minority about not feeling that level of exclusivity, that it's got to be inclusive. And that's a good example to demonstrate, I guess, something that's so simple that you think would be no big issue is having such a negative impact on one or two individuals. So it's something to be mindful of when you go into those types of situations.
And I think the interesting thing is it's very difficult for the person that feels in the minority to actually be the one that raises it or calls it out.
Yes, until you become the CEO, which was what happened to me. So then that's where you, you know, you can, there's a payback, and that I took control of the agenda. Of course, those conversations didn't happen, and, you know, we kept everybody professional and on point. But so that's the aim, Lisa, I guess.
I love it. I love it. That's right. You grow up and you take over. But exactly. But it can become everybody's responsibility, I guess. And you know, quite often in a team environment like that, to call out those things if you are aware of it and you feel comfortable to do so, is not a bad idea. So let's face it, there's no rule book for many of these discussions, and we don't get things right all the time. So John, you said you're going to share with us a story of when things worked out badly, and some of the lessons that perhaps you've taken from this.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go back now to a time. I did actually try this whole work from home thing early on in my, but it was 2004. And I was running a division at another retailer, and I had a team member that was really struggling with family, you know, trying to balance the whole thing around family, personal, and work. And this was a time when we didn't have mobile phones. We had no technology. And if you did want to dial in, if you wanted to get into work, you had to dial in. So that wasn't long ago, but some of you might remember. And there was some green screens. That's what you'd get if you actually got in and actually were able to do it. But I'd known this lady for quite some time, and she's real talent, a high achiever. And so when we had the discussion, so without any consideration whatsoever, and I was quite, you know, this was like 20 odd years ago. So this is, you know, I was quite junior, I would say, and maybe not as well adversed in life experiences. So, you know, really quickly, I just said, you know, no problems. We can work a couple of days from home and we can see how it goes. And that was kind of it. And so it's probably the worst. And I remember it, I still remember it because it was so difficult because I wanted this to work, but it was probably the worst experiment decision I'd ever made. The intent was great, but I actually hadn't worked through how it would practically work. And so here's what I don't, you know, what did I do wrong, or what did I learn? So I hadn't agreed to specific dates, first of all, so it would fluctuate from week to week. I didn't have a scheduled review date to see, you know, how does it work for her, for the organisation, and for the team. I was setting up meetings where this individual was wasn't in the office, so other individuals in her team would have to attend the meetings on her behalf because you had no MS Teams back then and all that other stuff. And so that was putting a whole lot of pressure on the rest of the teams. The debrief tracks weren't back, so the team then became dysfunctional. You know, if I had my time again, I'd set up what great looks like for both of us and for the organisation. And yes, so how did this come to, you know, how did we bring this to an end? So in the end, I kind of had to have the really tough discussion, you know, how is it working for her? How is it working for, I guess, for myself and the organisation? It wasn't really working for her either because she could see the issues that she was creating on the team at work. So she may have got some benefit on you know, and it wasn't then, it was creating more dramas, you know, I guess at home for her. So she, you know, she kind of basically said that she had a discussion with her husband. They kind of moved some things around, and you know, she was able to then to come back again. This is 2004. Come back into the office, and she felt that she could give 100% to work, 100% to the family, and she had a different, you know, arrangement at home. But I learned, you know, so if you go through when I spoke about what my learnings are, they generally came from this experience. It went from 2004, so I didn't approach this for another, you know, 4 years at this topic. That's how scarred I was from this whole experiment. But I'm glad I went back, and I'm glad I was able to you know, to actually move on from it, to be honest with you. And I think, you know, for anybody that knows me, I'm you know, I always look at things as a learning experience, and what can you learn from it? How do you get better from that? So I'm glad I did that, and I think many good outcomes have come out of that bad situation. But I still talk to that individual to this day, and you know, she's in a great place, and we laugh about that whole 2004 incident.
Yeah, well, clearly you can see in what you were discussing earlier, you've put a lot of those boundaries in place to make it workable. So yeah, great. Good to know. Often inappropriate situations happen when you're least expecting them, and this tends to catch people by surprise. And without a plan, often the default is not to act in preference to doing the wrong thing. So Paul, you've got a great example of this. Do you want to share with us your story?
Sure. So in my career, post my retail career, I worked for one of the big four professional services. I sort of landed, I was doing advisory work. I ended up doing more advisory work in diversity, equality, inclusion, less retail. I'm not sure whether that talks to my retail capability, but regardless of all that, that's what I fell into. And I ended up chairing the diversity, equality, inclusion board, and I was also a coach to many of the partners. Now, in professional services, predominantly accountants, predominantly white, male, Anglo-Saxon accountants, so they've got a real issue with diversity. And one of the partners that I was coaching had explained that he'd gone into a client meeting with another male partner, and the client was female, who was wearing a dress. I'm not too sure whether it was semi-revealing or what, it doesn't really matter. And the partner, one of the male partners, had said to the female client, saying, would you like sugar with your tea? But I can see you're sweet enough in that dress. So it was a really overly sexualized comment, and I'm probably not describing it as well as what had happened. And the other partner didn't know what to do. So he came to me for advice. So this is where you sort of think, common sense would say you would probably, what are the options if you're in that situation? So this second partner who I was coaching felt really awkward, didn't know what to do. And it was pleased that he at least raised with me to understand how we tackle it. Now, you've got a couple of options. If you're in a situation where you observe something that is actually either sexist or it's harassment, often we just walk past it. And I say we see it, we don't say anything. We might even laugh it off through anxiousness, because we don't know what we're doing. You feel awkward. But the opportunities there are sort of, when I say they're not quite endless, because by saying nothing means you actually are part of that sort of bad behavior. So you've got to think through what you can do. And this is what I discussed with this partner. So what could you comfortably do? Now, if that was me, I could have actually interjected in a soft hand, but to make sure it was clear that was inappropriate. And you could simply say, hey, Jack, that's so super inappropriate. I think that deserves an apology. And you could do that with a smile on your face and prompt Jack to lead him to actually apologize. And that would be the way I would have handled that situation, to soften the blow, but equally make a point that you don't accept. And in fact, talk about how you feel. That made me feel awkward. So, once the situation you're out of that situation, it's then worth personally going back to that person and saying, look, I just want you to know what you said made me feel uncomfortable. These are the reasons why. So it's important that it's that old adage around actually what you walk past are the rules that you said. I can't remember. There's an old terminology, John. You might help me out there, or Lisa. But there's, the standards you walk past are the standards you accept. That's the one. So that's what actually happens. And it's, to sort of think, this is a fairly recent example. So it's not like it was from yesteryear, how sometimes, what this partner was doing was literally sugarcoating his sexist remarks by by making a comment. And it's sort of one of those things where you sort of think, how can you justify it? Just can't. You've got to step in and correct it. Often when we're worried about, and this happens a lot with men, they feel that they're so scared that they're going to upset or be politically incorrect that they prefer to say nothing. That's actually the worst thing. Have a go, get it wrong, apologize, move on. So it's so important that you just don't sort of sit there and be a passive recipient of what's going on, that you're actually, standing up and say, actually, that's not acceptable to me. And making sure. So really, really awkward situation that where you think, would that happen in the 21st century and today? Would it? Well, it actually still is. That's the reality.
Yeah, totally. And I think it comes back to that bystander bit of, are you accepting it or, tacitly accepting it? We've got a couple of really interesting questions. One was from somebody from many of the companies that are now in Australia, the larger ones, our head offices are based overseas. And so they aren't as across diversity, inclusion, and equity as many of the Australian companies. Is there any advice that you would give to people working in some of those companies about how they can help bring the team culture into more of what's acceptable within companies in Australia today?
Look, I think if you're an Australian, if it's an international company, a little tough. I think that's where, and often we see this a lot, particularly if it's Singaporean based or, and not to call out any specific country, just that Singapore seems to be where a lot, I think it's still illegal to be gay. So, and it's a criminal offence. So I think there's a lot of that happen. I think this is where an industry association can help. So we do a lot of work in diversity inclusion, and you can share those resources and so become part of a greater community. It's not a free plug. It's more around actually finding support. And then that way you've got, and that may come from an industry association, may come from another colleague, but it's important. The best way for me to summarize this, it takes leadership. So you've got to step up. This is where you get to step up and actually stand for something and make a change. And say, actually, we're not thinking contemporarily on the 21st century, and we need to change as an organisation. If you find that's not received well by your line manager, your organisation, again, I'm not sure it's the happiest place for you to be. So something that we all need to take accountability for. Don't think it's somebody else's job, Lisa. That's my message.
Yeah, Lisa, I'd probably jump in on this one. Now we have offices across Southeast Asia, so Hong Kong, China, Bangalore, Bangladesh, and I've missed one, but we've got one in Delhi and one in Vietnam now. And we have values, and we've got offices in New Zealand as well. But we have values that they're called Kmart values. So we don't have a different set of values as you go to different countries. It is the Kmart values, and that's what we try to, or that's what we instill in all our team members, irrespective of where you work. And that seems, and then we correct each other. So, Paul, your answer, we've all got a role to make sure that, we play a part, a leadership part in calling out any behaviours that fall foul of the values or the culture that you're trying to establish. So that's really important for us. Haven't been involved in an organisation where you've got the head office overseas, but I would, if it didn't line up with the values, I know it's easy for me to say today, but if the company doesn't line up with your own individual values, you might not be at the right place. And I would look elsewhere to make sure that I kind of line up the same values with my employer.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we have a huge amount of case studies now on the Gender Equity Awards site of what, the great companies are doing. So again, it's more material you can share across, as well as, what WGEA has as standards. So there are a lot of standards within Australia that people can access, I guess, which is part of maybe educating other companies. And sooner or later, competition forces kick in, and the good companies are getting the best people because they're great companies. So I think to John's point earlier about, providing all those things, it's what makes great teams. So we've had a great discussion about being authentic, being great listeners, being empathetic, and I think you've all demonstrated that. And some of those key attributes are really important when you're having those one-on-one conversations. And I think the business case is really clear about the benefits, both from the shopper's perspective and from the companies. More diverse organisations are more profitable. So just to, as we go towards the end, John, do you have any further pieces of advice you'd like to share?
Oh, look, we've touched on authenticity. I think, yeah, so authenticity is really, really important. And I wanted to go to an example just before COVID. I wasn't, what you've seen today wasn't the person you would see probably, even 4 or 5 years ago. I was a very scripted person. I was really worried about the words coming out in the right way. So if I had a presentation, I'd be practicing it all weekend before. And then I realised with COVID, I just didn't have that opportunity to do that. And people didn't want to see a robot. They wanted to see an authentic individual that's got, heart. But someone, so just because I've got, I'm more authentic and I've got a bit of heart doesn't mean that I'm any less, when it comes to business, any less competitive than anybody else. So my advice would be, to try to be your authentic self as you go through these different you know, the situations that you're dealing with. Start with the place that most people start from, a place of goodness. That took me a few years to kind of work that out, because I think it delivers you a really good outcome. And over your journey, you will learn, you will make some mistakes, but, you know, don't give up, and I guess learn from those mistakes and improve yourself. I mean, that would be the advice that I would give in this space.
Yeah, fantastic. And Paul, you?
Yeah, look, I think building on what John said, it resonates for me really well. I think it's important to be authentic. It's important to be also demonstrate compassion. Everybody comes, unless you've walked in their shoes, you don't really know what they're dealing with in their day, what's happening at home. And that's a really important message. But, you know, we've all got, you know, we only have one life. And I think it's so important that we do things on our terms. And, you know, if you feel that you're not getting that from your current relationship, whether that's your personal relationship or your work relationship, then it's up to you to make that change. And we do need, and I notice there's mostly a lot of men on the call today, we do need male advocates for women because of the inequality that exists and the privilege that comes with being born male. And we've got to acknowledge that, because, you know, there's a lot of privileges that we get that we just take for granted. And so important that we're all in this together, because we want to grow together. But most importantly, that, you know, there's 50% of the population in Australia is female, and we don't have 50% females in senior positions. So that's really the target we need to. Once we achieve that, then we know, Lisa, we've got equality, but there's a way to go.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we're at the end of time. You've heard it from the experts. If you want to be part of accelerating gender equity, you need to take some action. Sitting on the sidelines won't help. So don't be afraid of difficult conversations, and hopefully through some of these great examples, you now have your own ideas. A huge thank you to John Gualtieri and Paul Zahra. And we have some applause.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Paul.
Thank you. You too. See you, John.
Thank you.